Victor Hugo and Adèle Fouché met when they were 7 and 6, so they were really childhood friends. Mother's death in 1822 to marry Adèle. He was really madly in love with her. After 3 years and a half of engagement, Victor Hugo married her, and they had 5 children.
Said that Victor Hugo's novel is the greatest source material for any musical ever written.
It's what parents read to their kids when they're growing up, and it's got this extraordinary place in the French classical canon.
The story is universal, and I probably never would have read it if I had not have actually been in this.
He describes Fantine's soul powerfully, and that just gave me a greater resolve in my performance to really go there, to try to interpret the feeling that his words gave me.
Victor Hugo was born in 1802 and died in 1885, so he covers the whole century. He was the son of the Général Hugo, who was the general of the First Empire, and Sophie Trébuchet was his mother, and she was a monarchist. And his childhood was not very happy because the couple quarreled very often. They disagree on many topics, specifically politically, and they soon lived separately. First, he took the side of his monarchist mother, but slowly he changed his mind about his father and about the Napoleonic era. So in that regard, Marius in Les Misérables is not so far from the young Victor Hugo. He talked of revolution. Marius was raised by monarchist grandfather and then changed his mind about his father, who died in Waterloo. Victor Hugo and Adèle Fouché met when they were 7 and 6, so they were really childhood friends. Mother's death in 1822 to marry Adèle. He was really madly in love with her. After 3 years and a half of engagement, Victor Hugo married her, and they had 5 children. I have to say that Adèle Fouché was the first not to be faithful to her husband because she had an affair around 1830 with Sainte-Beuve, who was a very famous critic and writer in France, and a friend of Victor Hugo. In 1833, Victor Hugo met with an actress who had a role in Lucrèce Borgia, which is a Victor Hugo play, and she was a very charming young actress called Juliette Drouet, and they fell madly in love with each other. Their first night together, which was on February 16, will be the same date as Marius and Cosette's first night, so it's like a hint in the novel.
We'll remember that night.
He had started to write Les Misérables in 1845 and then was interrupted by the Revolution of 1848. He had to leave France in 1852, right after the coup d'etat of Napoleon III. Victor Hugo protested and called Napoleon III a traitor of France, and of course he was banned from his country. Hugo went to Jersey. He spent there a few years, and then he was expelled from Jersey because he defended so-called terrorists in Jersey. So he went to Guernsey. until 1870.
So he finished Les Misérables in good old British soil in Guernsey over 16 years.
Les Misérables was published in April 1862, and right away it was a huge popular success. About 100,000 copies were sold, and it was very popular abroad.
It is set in a particular era, 1800s and early 1800s in France, but it feels timeless.
Sadly, human nature rarely learns from itself, and all the themes that Hugo discusses in it and tells so brilliantly are happening in our world again and again.
I mean, the Occupy Wall Street movement and the French Revolution started in a similar way. They were slow burns. It took a while to really take off.
Les Misérables is one of the great celebrations of the idea that we as a mass, as a people, can rise up and change our circumstance for the better. And the French Revolution was a very painful time for France, where it took many decades for France to arrive at a new and more just identity as a society. And I think that the story gives us all hope that it's still possible to overcome some of the hurdles facing us socially at the moment.
Everywhere you have people who want a better life, a better world.
He was beyond everyone. I mean, he was considered one of the greatest men, quite rightly, that France has ever produced, and indeed the world has ever produced.
We all hope to leave a better world for our children. And Victor Hugo knew all that. The genius is that not only did he have all that in his head, but he was able to put it on paper.
One of the things that I love about the book is it's an exploration of love in all its profundity, using language that is some of the most beautiful I've ever read.
It's a colossal and masterful work, and it was a great joy to have an excuse to read it.
It's a remarkable book that just ignites your heart and, I know it sounds poetic, but just illuminates your soul.
Thank you, Victor Hugo.
By the end of the 18th century, Europe had undergone a profound intellectual and cultural shift known as the Enlightenment. Philosophers and artists promoted reason and human freedom over tradition and religion. The rise of a middle class and printed materials encouraged political awareness, and the American Revolution had turned a former English colony into an independent republic. Yet France, one of the largest and richest countries in Europe, was still governed by an ancient regime of three rigid social classes called estates. The monarch, King Louis XVI, based his authority on divine right and granted special privileges to the first and second estates, the Catholic clergy and the nobles. The third estate, middle-class merchants and craftsmen, as well as over 20 million peasants, had far less power. And they were the only ones who paid taxes, not just to the king, but to the other estates as well. In bad harvest years, taxation could leave peasants with almost nothing, while the king and nobles lived lavishly on their extracted wealth. But as France sank into debt due to its support of the American Revolution and its long-running war with England, change was needed. King Louis appointed Finance Minister Jacques Necker, who pushed for tax reforms and won public support by openly publishing the government's finances. But the king's advisors strongly opposed these initiatives. Desperate for a solution, the king called a meeting of the Estates General, an assembly of representatives from the three estates, for the first time in 175 years. Although the Third Estate represented 98% of the French population, its vote was equal to each of the other estates. And unsurprisingly, both of the upper classes favored keeping their privileges. Realizing they couldn't get fair representation, the Third Estate broke off, declared themselves the National Assembly, and pledged to draft a new constitution, with or without the other estates. The revolution had begun. As rebellion spread throughout the country, the feudal system was abolished. The Assembly's Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen proclaimed a radical idea for the time. After a trial, the once revered king was publicly beheaded, signaling the end of 1,000 years of monarchy and finalizing the September 21st Declaration of the First French Republic, governed by the motto Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité. A general named Napoleon Bonaparte took charge, becoming emperor as he claimed to defend the revolution's democratic values. All in all, the revolution saw 3 constitutions and 5 governments within 10 years, followed by decades alternating between monarchy and revolt before the next republic formed in 1871. And while we celebrate the French Revolution's ideals, we still struggle with many of the same basic questions raised over 2 centuries ago.